Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, and especially thank you for being a part of our Accumulate community. It's a brand new community, as you probably know. And so we're really excited to have you here, really excited to see what kind of cool projects you build around our ecosystem. So thank you very much for joining. So the goal here is to prepare you all and teach you enough about Accumulate to enable you to build some really cool apps. So thank you guys for joining. We've got a great schedule ahead of you. So myself, my name is Quentin Vidal. I'm a senior project manager here at DeFi Devs, and DeFi Devs is the core community contributor to the Accumulate protocol. I also have on the line Kyle Michelson, who will give you a brief overview of Accumulate, the core features. Then I'll pass it on to Ben Stolman, our project manager, who will go into the status report, what's available in the protocol today, and what will be coming up soon. So you're well aware of what you can do and what you cannot do quite yet. And then last but not least, I'll pass it off to Ethan, our senior engineer, who will go through the setting up your environment, introducing you to the code, and getting you well versed in how to get the Accumulate source code onto your system. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it on to Kyle Michelson for our intro to Accumulate.
Thank you, Quentin. So once again, I want to thank all of you for coming today. It's great to see so many people interested in building on Accumulate and helping us improve the protocol. My name is Kyle Michelson, and I'm the Director of Technology for DeFi Devs. My role is developing use cases for Accumulate, seeking out business partnerships with a technology-heavy focus, and connecting Accumulate to research and academic institutions. I wanted to spend a little time introducing Accumulate to all of you, who we are, what we do, and where we came from. So the Accumulate protocol isn't really a layer 1 or layer 2 blockchain. It's something entirely different. As Jay Smith, our VP of Business Development, likes to point out, we're more like an ocean that seamlessly connects blockchains and traditional enterprises. We're the first blockchain to be organized entirely around digital identities, which take the form of light accounts for simple data or token transactions, and accumulate digital identifiers that are versatile identities with the ability to issue tokens, manage keys, and stake assets, among other things. These powerful functions enable users to replicate complex corporate structures, build new kinds of decentralized apps, and fully engage in decentralized finance. I know many of you may be aware that Accumulate was born from Factom. While many of Factom's roles and innovations were carried over to Accumulate, like its use of its use as a data layer for blockchain, or its ability to anchor transactions to layer 1 protocols, Accumulate was built with an entirely different architecture. We have shorter block times for faster confirmations, delegated proof of stake as opposed to proof of authority, the ability of each validator to be constructed and tested independently of other validators, and most importantly, identity as the atomic unit of the blockchain. Next slide, please. So we don't use sidechains, and we're not really a chain of chains per se. Every identity on Accumulate is an ever-growing Merkle tree that's treated by the protocol as its own independent blockchain. And every identity is handled by a particular block validator network, or BVN for short. That's why we consider identity to be the atomic unit of Accumulate. This architecture also allows massively parallel operations and gives Accumulate the ability to scale linearly as more capacity is added in terms of additional BVNs. Organizing the blockchain this way allows you to put sub-identities and accounts within an Accumulate digital identifier, or ADI. For example, ADI Kyle could contain any number of sub-ADIs, and those sub-ADIs could contain additional sub-ADIs, token accounts, data accounts, staking accounts, and so on in an identity hierarchy. Your ADIs also have key hierarchies that are organized into key books that are tied to transactions, key pages that have different priority levels, and keys with the ability to do multi-sig transactions. You can manage your keys, back them up, change your security, or transfer ownership. This kind of organization allows for nearly unlimited use cases, which I'll get into later on. In addition to identity and key hierarchies, Accumulate is also different from other blockchains in its ability to anchor summary hashes into other blockchains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Solana. Anchors basically allow Accumulate to buy the security provided by much larger blockchains at a massively reduced price. Accumulate is also creating something called scratch chains that allow multiple parties to arrive at a consensus off the main chain. This can be done at low cost to them without overburdening our blockchain. If a consensus is reached, the data is erased, but the proof of the consensus is maintained always. So now I want to hand this off to Ben Stolman, who's going to provide a more detailed protocol overview.
Great, thank you, Kyle. So yeah, I'm going to go over our protocol and some of the initial products that we've created to interact with the protocol. So first, Accumulate uses Tendermint as its consensus engine for validating transactions. And we have multiple Tendermint networks, which are block validator networks and a directory network. Accumulate is made up of block validator networks where each network validates a subset of transactions. All block validator networks funnel the state changes of identities and the accounts that they manage into the directory network, which tracks the entire state of the blockchain. And as Kyle mentioned, having multiple block validator networks shards Accumulate and allows for the parallel processing of transactions. And this is why we can have such a high TPS in the Accumulate network at around 70,000 transactions per second. Next slide, please. So Accumulate is made up of URLs which index our blockchain. So everything has a URL. And like token accounts are very similar in nature to accounts represented in Bitcoin and Ethereum, where you have one private key and an unnamed hexadecimal address. And as you can notice, the end of this address has /acme. Acme is the native token to the Accumulate blockchain and is burned to buy credits, which are used for the creation of things such as an identity. So light token accounts, in essence, are the genesis for identity creation. Next slide, please. So as mentioned by Kyle, identities, otherwise known as Accumulate digital identifiers, have a very simple URL with a human readable name. And identities contain assets such as tokens and data and have sophisticated key management. So you can name your identity whatever you would like, and it provides structure for everything that belongs to your identity. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of how a ADI or Accumulate digital identifier token account would look like. You could have Bob/tokens. You could name whatever the token account, whatever you would like. And in the same manner, Bob/data for keeping track of the data that you're hashing to your identity and to the Merkle tree that your identity consists of. Next slide, please. So one of the key innovations of Accumulate is this key management structure that we have. And keybooks store the hierarchical management for an ADI using key pages and keys within those pages. A keybook in its most basic form is an ordered set of key pages by priority, where any key page can modify itself or a page of lower priority. And some of those modifications may include adding, updating, or removing keys. An account such as an ADI token account or ADI data account can specify what keybook, key page, and keys applies to transactions for that account. Next slide, please. Some of the upcoming features in the next build will include light data accounts for hashing data to the blockchain that are separate from identities, scratch accounts, which are data accounts that are pruned after a certain period of time, and for that reason cost less to create. Token issuance, you'll be able to issue custom tokens, multi-sig, So we'll have very intuitive and sophisticated multi-sig transactions, and something interesting called managed chains, where you can assign a manager to, let's say, an ADI data account or an ADI token account, which requires an extra signature by the manager for the transaction to be processed. We're also going to have staking, delegated staking, and validators can also stake themselves. Next slide, please. So we have an Explorer where you can query transactions by their transaction ID, as well as the URLs that make up the account. We also have a built-in faucet for funding light token accounts. And at the moment, a basic dashboard which shows the transactions per second averaged over an hour. Next slide, please. We also have a mobile application, which is in the Google Play and App Store, and that allows for the for transactions between, let's say, light token accounts and ADI token accounts. We've implemented QR codes to set up transactions, and with identities, you'll have the identity token accounts and then the key management specific to the identity. Next slide, please. We also have a command line interface, which is mostly going to be used by developers. And that will have a series of commands as shown. And one of the things that we're adding to this build is the ability to generate ADI data accounts. So that will be allowed through the command line interface. And I will move this on to Quentin, who will talk about the product ecosystem.
Thank you, Ben. And before we get into the next section, I do want to say that the command line tool that we have, the Block Explorer and the mobile app, please use those as tools for your own development. They'll be especially useful to get your hands dirty and learn more about the protocol. So those are at your disposal. And that's also to say that we do not want to discourage you from building your own wallets. And as you'll see in this next section, there are a lot of different types of wallets that we're still looking for. So getting into it, we're going to do a brief overview of the different types of tools and software that we're hoping to see built through this hackathon. This list is not exclusive. You can build whatever you like as long as it uses Accumulate in one way or the other. But here's some examples to inspire you and also give you a sense of what we're hoping to see. So the first and foremost on that list is development tools. And the reason why this is foremost is because our first audience that we want to attract is people like you, developers. So developers need tools, and the more tools we can have out in our ecosystem, the easier we can make the job for integrating, for learning more. And so we would really love to see that. And that includes, command line tools of any sort, testing frameworks, SDKs. So we are especially interested in seeing several software development kits out there. And for those who don't know, if you go to our hackathon main page, you'll see under the themes, there are actually links to a GitHub page where we have different ideas listed there. So if you want a more expansive list, please check that out. Sandboxes as well. Besides development tools, we do want to see lots of wallets. We think a healthy ecosystem requires multiple wallets. And so we have built a mobile wallet. Doesn't mean you can't as well, but we would love to see some browser plugin wallets. So think MetaMask, hardware apps as well. So we have in our current roadmap a Ledger Nano app, but if one of you in the hackathon built one, that would make our lives easier. So we would love to see that, because then we could cross that off our list. And hardware apps for other hardware devices as well, Trezor or whatever you feel motivated to build for. And last but not least, web wallets. So web wallets are those that you connect to with a private key, external key management system. So like a hardware app, or you can paste in your private key, use a key store file. It gives you a UI to be able to do things on Accumulate. Next up is learning tools. So just like with the dev tools, this is really important for us to build our community and build our ecosystem. And so we would love to see some learning tools. Because this is a hackathon, these learning tools should be software of some sort. So that includes things like playgrounds or educational sandboxes. And if you're not sure what that is, check out eth.build. That's a great educational sandbox for Ethereum. That'll give you an idea of what we're looking for in that category. Interactive tutorials. So that's if you've ever taken a Learn to Code course online, usually you'll see there's a built-in IDE and you're going through instructions and you're able to practice there in the IDE. So something like that for Accumulate, we would love to see. Last on this list, laboratories and transaction builders. And if you're not sure what that is, check out laboratory.stellar.org. So these allow you to, it gives you a UI to build transactions on the protocol, go step by step and really learn how transactions are built on Accumulate. And so we would love to see that. And this list is not exclusive either. There's, I'm sure, tons of other learning tools that we would love to see, but just to give you an idea. And last but not least, from my list, bridges, layers, and oracles. So these aren't necessarily tools, but applications that would be built on Accumulate or extend Accumulate. And so that includes cross-chain bridges. So think a bridge to Ethereum, a bridge to Solana, things that allow us to take tokens from other ecosystems and bring them into Accumulate. Interchain bridges, smart contract layer. This is something we also have on our roadmap, but if one of you, this is a very big piece, and if one of you take this on and are able to build a smart contract layer for Accumulate to extend the functionality of Accumulate, we would love to see that. And last but not least, data oracles. So this is an application that can build real world data into the Accumulate ecosystem. And for anyone that is well versed in DeFi, you know, this is especially important for tons of use cases out there. If you think about decentralized lending protocols or decentralized exchanges, a lot of these applications need real world data to be able to work. And so we'd love to see an oracle that can bring some real world data into Accumulate. And that's it for my section. I'm going to pass it on to Kyle again to go into some more in-depth use cases.
Thanks, Quentin. So even though Accumulate has nearly unlimited number of use cases, we have limited time today. So I'm going to briefly cover 4 broad categories of use cases. I recommend for all of you to go to our main website, accumulatenetwork.io, then under blog, then under use cases to read more about these examples. So getting right into it, Accumulate is very good at executing multi-party contracts. You can imagine, for example, a person's will, where their assets are going to be distributed among a number of people if they pass away. The signers on the will might include family, lawyers, accountants, business partners, and so on. While the person's alive, the signers may come and go. You could change lawyers, or people could lose their keys. With Accumulate's hierarchy of keys, you're able to back up and recover keys held in cold storage from a key page at a higher priority level. Those higher priority keys could also add or remove signatures as people enter and leave the contract. Using managed chains, which basically allows a transaction to go through only when the owner of a second keybook signs a transaction, you could also assign a legal entity control of the final execution of the will. Also, like I mentioned earlier, Accumulate is able to replicate complex corporate structures due to its identity and key hierarchies. You could have, for example, different ADIs for different departments, sub-ADIs for managers, second-level sub-ADIs for employees, and third-level sub-ADIs for clients. All of those ADIs and sub-ADIs have their own keybooks, key pages, and keys with different permissions. You could have token accounts under ADIs that hold petty cash, or other accounts that manage company funds depending upon the level of the employee. One account could also issue tokens that correspond to real estate, for example, while a managed chain could provide oversight, approving or denying a transaction. Next slide, please. Also, IoT is a great use case because it generates a huge amount of data, and Accumulate is great at organizing large data sets. We have the ability to prune or delete that data, but prove that it existed through Accumulate's architecture. We can delete the data in the Merkle trees, but record the state in the Patricia trees. Imagine, for example, that you're tracking food that's being transported across the ocean. You have IoT sensors for temperature, humidity, or whatever else. If temperature exceeds a certain value for a certain time, then a food is considered spoiled. In the future, Accumulate will have the ability to keep data on a pending chain for about 2 weeks. And if this high temperature event happens, for example, that data is put onto the main chain. If it doesn't happen, the data is pruned because there's no longer a need for it. However, you can still verify that all the sensors were working during that time. This also gives you the ability to prove a negative by providing a complete audit trail, even if data is deleted. A lawyer can't say, for example, that the defendant is leaving out all the video that would exonerate their client because they can cryptographically prove that all the data is there. Finally, I want to introduce the SDAO, or Sponsored DAO. I think most of you are familiar with a decentralized autonomous organization, or a DAO, where people who stake tokens are able to vote on the direction of the organization. Accumulate proposed a hybrid structure called the SDAO, where a bank or other legal entity manages the DAO, but the individual members own their own assets. This works in Accumulate because of our hierarchy of identities and keys, and allows us to perform complex operations like subdividing and selling a mortgage property that you really can't do or do well on a regular DAO. With an SDAO, the bank could issue attestations to a VP, who could issue attestations to agents, who could issue attestations to the clients if the client passes KYC or is legally considered an accredited investor. You could also revoke those attestations if the client loses their status or maybe an agent behaves badly. And you can transfer the agent's keys to a new employee. The main idea is that we allow legal compliance while maintaining flexibility. So now I'm going to pass it off to Ethan, who is going to talk about building Accumulate.
And Ethan will be sharing his own screen and give you a closer look into the code itself.
All right, so the first order of business is the requirements for running Accumulate. And the first one is get to to clone and install the source code. And the Git website has instructions for installing on all the main platforms. macOS usually comes with Git, but if you don't want Apple's version of it, then there's instructions here. For Linux, there's instructions for pretty much all of the different kind of package managers. And Windows, there's an MSI installer you can download. And then to build the source code, you need, I need this Zoom banner to get out of my way. Oh. Or I can use keystrokes. So to build, you need Go, and the go.dev has instructions for installing Go. And in most cases, there's just packages you can install. On Linux, most distros have Go in the package manager. However, you might get an out-of-date version. For Accumulate, you need Go 1.16, though that might become 1.17. If you don't want to install a Go 1.17 or 16 as your system Go, you can also use the golang.org/dl project. So there are instructions here, but essentially you can download or install any version you want. And using the instructions on golang.org/dl, you can install any version. So if you want to use that for specific versions, you can do that. One thing to note on the repository, if you go to accumulate github.com/accumulate network/accumulate, if you go to the wiki, we have some links here. There's the documentation folder in Git and the Gitbook website. And then Discord is primarily where we are interacting with the community, and we're going to be trying to move all of the all of the developer conversations there. And there's if you want to use binaries, this is a permanent link to the binaries built on GitLab.com or built through GitLab CI. And there are also some Docker images that you could use. So to download, or to start working, the first step is to clone the repository. And of course, you can fork it. I'm not going to do that today. Okay, well, yeah, of course. And once you have built the repository, or once you have cloned the repository, Go is a extremely easy to use language and tool system. So the daemon for the node is in CMD accumulated. And so I can just go run that, and that will get me the help message. And the CLI is in CMD/CLI, and you can get the CLI from that. So I will go ahead and use make to, well, I'm on Windows, so never mind. I'll make a binary. So go build, we'll make a binary in my current directory. So accumulated.exe. I can go install, we'll put it in the bin folder. And that depends on your environment, but generally it will go in this folder here. So so that's downloading, building, accumulate. If you have the Git and Go installed, it's very easy. To run a node, there are multiple ways to run a node. The simplest is to set up a local DevNet, to a local development environment that will run, or node network that will run on your computer. So to do that, we can run init devnet. I'm going to show the help here. There are a number of flags. If you just run init devnet, the working directory defaults to your own folder /accumulate or /accumulate. And it creates, so Ben was talking about BVNs. So we have an accumulate network consists of multiple Tendermint networks. So there's the DN, and then there are multiple BVNs, and each BVN can have some number of validators, and then you can have follower nodes. And the init devnet command lets you configure those. And then you can also, there's a workflow for using Docker and Docker Compose. I'm not going to go into, well, not sure if I'm going to go into that detail today, but in the simple case, you can just run this command. I prefer to have everything running in a local directory. So I use .nodes, and that initializes it. And by default, there are 2 BVNs, and each network has 2 followers or 2 validators and 1 follower. So with that default configuration, you get 3 networks because the DN and 2 BVNs, and 3 nodes per network because 2 validators and 1 follower. So you end up with a total of 9 nodes, and then we can execute that with run devnet. And this launches all of the nodes in a single window. And there is, in the config folder, there is a config.go. And of course, you can dig into the configuration here. And so that command creates this folder structure with a folder for the DN and for each BVN. And inside of there, you have a folder for each node. And the validators are created as the first nodes, and then the followers will be, so if you had 2 followers, there would be nodes 2 and 3 would be the followers. And we can go in here and dig into the configuration, and you can see how things are configured, and you can see that it starts by default with 127.0.1.1, and then the IP addresses increment. So the directory node has 3 nodes, so you have .1, .2, .3, and then VVN0 has .4, .5, .6, etc. And you can't override the IP addresses with a flag. One thing to note, if you are on Mac OS, then you have to go through some extra steps in order to make this work. I should probably add something to the wiki. There's documentation somewhere, but I don't totally remember where it is. But there's a command you can use in macOS to create aliases of the loopback interface. So if you want to be able to do this on macOS, then there's a little bit of extra work required. Windows and Linux, it works. So configuration file, this is Accumulate is the Accumulate configuration. Config.toml is the Tendermint configuration. There's a log level that has a log level per module. However, if you change in config/config.go, if you change the default log levels and rebuild the configuration, then that will update the configuration file, and you can change the level of logging you get here. So I'm going to go back to the folder and build the CLI. And now we have CLI.exe. And if we run the help, there is a flag that you can use to set which network the CLI targets. And this can be the server URL, can be any node in the network, because all nodes run an API and know how to forward messages to the appropriate network. In addition to using this flag, you can also set an environment variable, ACC API. So I'm going to set that to one of the local nodes. And the default, this is configurable, but the default base port is 26656, and the offset for the Accumulate API is the 4th port after the base port. So in the networks folder, in networks.go, there's the set of constants. So we have a base port, and that is passed to Tendermint as the peer-to-peer port, and then Tendermint opens up HTTP or JSON RPC and gRPC, and then we have this should probably read Accumulate API. So we have our API running on the 4th port after the base port. There was a 3rd entry in between here, which is why the numbers look the way they do. So, point being, by default, the port number that you need to connect to a local node is 26660. And then you always need the /v1. Once the CLI is upgraded to v2, that can be /v2 instead, or we might make the CLI smart enough to not need that. Now that I've set the environment variable, the default changes. So now I can run CLI commands. First thing you need to do is generate a light account. And that will generate an ED25519 key. And then it will create this URL for you. And the URL is basically the hash of the public key. Now that I have a key, or now that I have a light account, I can fund that light account with a faucet. And you might not immediately get your results because of the way the multiple BVMs work, because transactions get split between BVNs. So the results of your transaction might not be immediately evident. So that's the original transaction, and this is the second half of the transaction. Of course, normally you don't need to worry about looking at those, but that's transaction information. So I can look at the account. We have an account. It has 10 Acme in it because that's the faucet puts 10 Acme in your account. And then with that, I can go ahead and start doing everything else. So I'm creating a key, except I already have a key. And then with that, you can create an ADI. So whenever you do anything, some record needs to be responsible for putting up the credits to pay for that transaction, other than the add credits transaction. Though we're not actually charging credits right now, so you don't actually have to worry about credits at the moment. But you need some account that is sponsoring the transaction, or creating the ADI. So we're going to use the light account that we funded to do that. And then I want to call my ADI Ethan, and I'm going to use the key test key. And that should create a new ADI. And now we have a new ADI. And from there, you can go on to create token accounts and ADI data accounts and all of those things. And that is it for the demo.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, guys. So our last portion will be a Q&A. And before we get into that, I want to also mention the Discord. As Ethan showed, we have the link in our GitHub. We also have it on the hackathon page. There is a specific hackathons channel in the Discord. So if you have any questions related to the hackathon, please ask it there. Or generally questions about the protocol itself, you could ask there or on one of the more general channels, but any hackathon talk, please keep to the hackathons channel. And we're very active on Discord, so please use it as much as you like. So last but not least, we're going to go into the Q&A, and along with myself and Kyle, Ben, and Ethan, we also have quite a few of our engineers on the line as well to help with any questions you may have. So that being said, I'm going to open up the floor. Anyone who has any questions, please raise your hand. Or you can also type them into the chat as well.
Hey, Quentin, it's Mike. Tell me about, and I heard some of the presentation on this, but tell me about the where you see the wallet being in 6, 12, 24 months in terms of adaptability with other tokens and the ability, like how do you think that the wallet will compare to MetaMask over time or something, a product like that?
Thank you, Mike. Great question. So yeah, like Ben presented before, we do have a mobile wallet that we're currently building. MetaMask, for example, is a browser plugin wallet. And so that is a great example of something that we don't have and would love to see from this community, something that plugs into the browser. So the current version of our mobile app right now can do the basic features of building a light account, sending and receiving tokens using the faucet. Please keep in mind that not just the wallet, but the CLI and everything is only on testnet because our mainnet is not released yet and will not be released until March. So everything you do is on the testnet, which means more legroom to play around without worrying about doing anything bad or losing funds or anything like that. Coming up in this next build for the mobile app, which will be released next week, you'll be able to create ADIs. So those are the bread and butter of Accumulate, where you can have a named account. You can have several accounts within that ADI, as you've seen today, token accounts and data accounts particularly. You all should spend extra time learning more about data accounts. That's gonna enable a lot of really cool use cases. So check those out in your off time. Go to our docs, go to our Discord and ask questions. So yeah, that's the current state of our own mobile app. Thank you, Mike. And we'll give it 2 minutes if there are no questions in the next 2 minutes.
One thing I want to note is for the next few days before we release 0.3 on the testnet, the CLI and the testnet aren't particularly compatible with each other. So if you want to use specifically the testnet, then you should either check out the CLI API v1 tag to use the older version of the CLI, or use the DevNet or a local DevNet for your testing.
Thank you, Ethan. Yeah, it's a great thing to point out. Be wary of which branch you are on, and be wary of which network you're connecting to. We do have different features on the DevNet than the testnet. DevNet will always have the most bleeding edge features, but may not always work, because that's the stuff that's bleeding edge and coming out as quickly as we can make it. The testnet is our more stable releases. The next stable release coming out in 5 days. 5 or so days.
In general, the data on history, transaction history, and records and all of that on the DevNet is not retained. Those are wiped often daily. And on the testnet, we do our best to retain history in between releases. So up to mainnet, each testnet release will probably involve a history reset, but in between, if at all possible, we do not reset the history. However, sometimes there are bugs, and sometimes we have to reset the history on the testnet more than for releases.
Thank you, Ethan. I'm just going through the chat here, seeing a few questions come in. The first one from Joel: what are we required to submit for the hackathon? So Joel, please check out this recording after the end. We did have a section on different types of applications we're looking for. You can also go, if you go to the main page for the hackathon on Hacker Earth, you'll see links to the different categories of applications we're looking for, and there's links to ideas. So you can get some specific ideas of what we're specifically looking for. But I do want to note that it's not limited to that list by any means. Build whatever you can think of. There's only really 2 parameters to keep in mind. 1, it should be software of some sort, and 2, it should integrate Accumulate at some level. So as long as it's Accumulate, so don't submit Ethereum applications. Only submit Accumulate applications, or if you're building interactive tools or anything like that, as long as it's related to Accumulate, that's really the only requirement. Next question here: instead of using PowerShell, can we use an elevated command prompt? It looks like Ethan answered that in the chat. The answer was yes, but you shouldn't need to use an elevated command prompt. Looking down here for more questions.
Oh, I see one from Puneet. I hope I'm saying your name right. To learn more about Accumulate, I highly recommend that you go to our website. We have a lot of articles written, light paper, for example. We have under blogs, use cases, technical guides. Also, our Gitbook and GitHub are very useful. And then for information about the hackathon, you can see the link above that was copied by Jay. That has all the information, themes, and so on.
Thank you, Kyle. And the next question: do we have the options of RPC calls or other JS SDK to connect to the testnet? So right now there is not a JS SDK. The only library that currently exists is a Dart library, and that's going to be published next week. So right now, actually, there's no SDKs or libraries, and that's where you guys come in. So if you would love to build a JavaScript SDK, we would love to see that. So yeah, right now there is a built-in API, and that would be JSON RPC calls that you would use.
So some details about the API. If you're querying, it's pretty straightforward in terms of, it's a JSON RPC API, and you should be able to use any JSON RPC library. We have some documentation on the API. It's not necessarily up to date. If you're having issues with that, ask questions on Discord. For transactions, it is more complicated, and it's still it's still just a JSON RPC API. However, in order to generate signatures, you must first binary marshal the transaction and hash that and sign that. And if you don't do that in the same way that the nodes do, then you won't generate a correct signature. So for the signature generation, that is a sticky issue. We have a type generator that we use to generate the data types or generate the code for Go that does the binary marshaling. We hope to expand that type generator to other languages so we can generate code for other languages that generates identical marshaling code. But that has not yet happened. And if anybody is interested in working on that, contact me on Discord and I can point you at the code.
And let me just say here, please don't spam the chat with emojis. We want to keep it open to questions. And so I did see one more question from Big Dex. Accumulate runs on Golang. The answer is yes. Accumulate is built on Go. So any last questions? We still have 12 more minutes before the end of our scheduled time. So if we don't see another question in the next minute or two, we'll probably end early, but the floor is yours.
Talk about, and I had to step off for just a little bit, so maybe you did mention it, but let's talk a little bit about the relationship with the Factom community and why we think that's important to this project and on many different levels. But I just think it's a good background to maybe touch on for the people to join today.
Absolutely. And I would actually like to point that question to Paul or Jay Smith, if you're on the line, as our Factom originals. If you guys are there, could you take that one?
Yeah, I can take it. There are a lot of advantages to integration of Factom or accumulate onto Factom or replacing Factom. One is that architecturally they're very similar and are approaching the same problems. By doing this massive update, we're effectively hitting a lot of community goals of rebranding, remarketing, enhancing functionality, addressing stability issues, increasing transactions per second, and just a whole host of things. Factom was where we got our chops when it comes to identity on the blockchain. A number of entities, Factom Inc. and Spherion and a number of others, got involved in W3C digital identifiers, the growing standard for digital identity on blockchains, and some of our best traction in Factom has always been in that identity side. So we're able to bring in a whole community that has been involved with viewing blockchains in this particular way, in terms of building on top of the Factom community. We're maintaining that knowledge base and those experienced parties. And from Accumulate's point of view, there's huge advantages. It could have been launched as a fork, but just like Ethereum 2.0 could be launched as a fork, but you're able to derive the history, the origin date of September 15th when the Factom protocol first launched, that we're effectively continuing that protocol. So there's a lot of regulatory advantages there. And there's probably other deals. There's just a rich synergy in taking this approach, building on top of the Factum history.
Thank you, Paul. It's a great background.
And one question we got, which I think is a very good question to highlight. Saurav, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, asked, can we issue NFTs on Accumulate? I saw a mention of tokens during the presentation. I wrote a brief answer in the chat, but I'd like to hear from Paul or Ethan or anyone on our team to dive more into that question, because I think we'll get a lot of interest around NFTs in this hackathon.
I believe that in the end, we don't have a NFT solution integrated into Accumulate at this point in time. We do have some designs that I've come up with but haven't yet socialized that would make NFT issuance very, very simple, would work very cleanly with the wallet, and would be very powerful. I can imagine a ton of uses of NFTs if they were approachable in connection to Accumulate digital identities, the ADIs, because one of the big things about NFTs is having reputation and clear transparency on who is issuing tokens and how they're issued, and Accumulate can address those needs.
And to add to that, just sort of disclaimer in general. So we are, as you can very well see, a very early stage protocol. New features are added every day. And what that means is there may not be a straightforward or very well structured way to approach certain use cases, but that doesn't mean it can't be done, even if we don't ourselves know of a novel way to approach certain of these use cases. So keep an open mind, think outside the box, and maybe you'll find a solution that you'll teach us about. That's what we're really hoping to see. The last question, will there be more webinars organized down the line? We have no plans right now. However, the Discord is open. If we feel that there is a lot of interest from the community, we'll consider doing another webinar down the line. But you have, and the next question was office hours. Consider Discord office hours. If you do want to have some one-on-one time with one of our engineers, we can perhaps work that out, as long as we don't have overwhelming interest for that, because our engineers do have a lot of work to do as well. But we'll try to support you in that. But really, Discord is your best bet to interact directly with our engineers. And Jay, awesome, thank you, Jay. There is a weekly Discord developer stand-up on Thursdays that gets announced a few minutes before the stand-up every Thursday on Discord. So that's another avenue for you as well. Thank you, Jay.
That developer stand-up is in 5 minutes.
So anyone who wants to join, go to our Discord right now to get the link. That'll be a great continuation if you want to keep learning more, if you're not ready to leave.
I think lastly, if Michael, Paul, or Jay would like to talk about our relationship with Enviroment, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And I know people are calling in from different time zones. Thank you so much for being with us. This has been great. Team did an awesome job with the presentation. I guess the thought on my mind is, look, we're building a community. And we think we're going to be around for a very, very long time. And we want everybody on this call to be a part of that community. Please talk to your friends and your network about what we're doing. Feel free to share this video and any other tutorials we have. But yeah, one thing I think we didn't mention is our relationship with Enviroment, which is effectively sort of our parent company, and that they seeded this business of, is essentially what happened. Enviroment is a data platform for private market assets. So if you think about private market, private equity or commercial real estate, anything that trades infrequently, turns out this market is about a $500 trillion marketplace, according to Bain, the consultancy. So as I say, if you think NFTs are cool, and we think NFTs are amazing, but when you consider the massive size of private market assets, $500 trillion, you realize that's a untapped market in terms of blockchain. And what needs to happen in order to bring greater liquidity to those assets is you need better data about the assets. So what you do is, if you can anchor those documents to the blockchain, you can verify, you can sort of credential what those documents, where they came from and their origin and so forth. Very important to the owners of private market assets. So that's sort of Invenium's core business. And we see Accumulate as an option for Invenium and their clients as they need to, anchor documents to the blockchain to sort of reach ultimate, liquidity for those assets. So anyway, we're very fortunate, just like we're very fortunate to have Factum and their legacy team as part of what we're doing. We're also extremely important to have Invenium sort of co-driving this with us as well. So I hope that's a little bit of just a little flavor of who Invenium is and the relationship between all these different parties.
Thank you, Mike. And just have to throw in the last disclaimer that Accumulate is a fully decentralized protocol. DeFi Devs, the subsidiary of Invenium, is a core contributor, community contributor, but it is a fully decentralized network, and anyone can contribute to the source code. All right, well, I think we can end it there. Thank you guys very much. Thank you, everyone. It's great to see so much participation, so much interest. We really look forward to seeing what comes out of this community. Please reach us on Discord. If you're not ready to end yet, join us on the developer stand-up that's happening in 40 seconds. And otherwise, good luck. We're here to support you any way we can.
Great job, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.